Welcome back, everyone. Ready to jump back into the Belgariad.
Always ready for more Eddings.
Last time, we finished up Pawn of Prophecy, right?
Yep, that's right. Left off with Garion and the gang sailing away, Orb of Aldur still missing in action.
Ah, yes. Quite the cliffhanger. Now, this time we're diving into Queen of Sorcery. Picks up right where we left off. Obviously, Garion's still on the run, but things are starting to get, well, a lot more intense.
Oh, absolutely. The stakes are definitely higher in this one. Garion's starting to realize that farm boy life, yeah, that was just the beginning. He's got a destiny, a prophecy hanging over him, and his powers. They're really starting to show.
Speaking of that prophecy, the whole Micronin Codex thing, it really starts to take center stage in Queen of Sorcery, wouldn't you say? All those cryptic verses, the multiple interpretations, it's a lot for a young guy to handle.
It is. Imagine, being told your whole life is basically preordained. That your choices, even your existence, are all part of some grand cosmic plan. That's got to be a heavy burden to carry, especially for someone like Garion, who's, well, he's still figuring things out.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a kid, really. And yet here he is being thrust into this world of sorcery, prophecies, and gods.
Right, talk about a crash course in adulthood. And it's not just the prophecy either. He's dealing with loss, with grief, with the realization that this quest, this fight against Torak, it's not a game. People are going to get hurt. People might die. It's a lot to process.
And then there's the whole, coming to terms with his powers. It's not all sunshine and roses, is it? He's got this incredible power inside him, but it's raw, untamed. It can be dangerous, even destructive, if he doesn't learn to control it.
Absolutely. Remember that scene with the boar hunt early on? It's not just about Gary proving himself to the Cherriks. It's about him facing his own mortality for the first time, realizing the power he has and the potential for both good and bad. That boar, it's almost like a metaphor for the larger struggles he's going to face.
Hmm, that's an interesting point. And then, of course, there's Salmissra, Queen of Nyissa. What a character.
Oh, she's fantastic, isn't she? Beautiful, powerful, manipulative, and utterly terrifying. She's obsessed with snakes, with power, with control, and she's got her sights set on Garion.
Right. From the moment they meet, there's this tension, this almost a predatory vibe, like she's sizing him up, seeing how she can use him.
She sees him as a pawn in her game, a way to gain even more power. And that whole transformation scene, seeing her turn into that giant serpent, chilling. It's like a visual representation of her true nature, the corruption that's consumed her.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those scenes you don't forget. And it makes you realize this isn't just some fairy tale quest.
Mm.
There are real consequences, real danger. Garion's life is on the line.
And not just his life, the fate of the world, too. If Salmissra gets her hands on the orb, if Torak rises to power, it's game over for everyone.
No pressure, right? So how do you think Garion's handling all this? I mean, he's gone from being a farm boy to, well, potentially the savior of the world, all in the span of a few months.
Honestly, I think he's doing remarkably well, all things considered. He's brave, he's resourceful, and even though he makes mistakes, he learns from them. He's got this innate goodness, a strong moral compass that I think will ultimately guide him.
Plus, he's got Aunt Paul. You can't forget about Aunt Paul. She's like a force of nature herself.
Oh, absolutely. She's the ultimate protector, the voice of reason, the one who keeps Garion grounded amidst all the chaos, and she's not afraid to give him a good talking to when he needs it.
True. She's definitely not one to mess with. But she's also incredibly loving and supportive. She sees the potential in Garion, the hero he could become, and she's determined to help him fulfill his destiny.
And speaking of destiny, I think we need to talk about Lildorn. He's this young, idealistic Asturian noble who gets tangled up with the Murgo Nachak.
Right. Leldoran is clearly a good guy, heart in the right place, but he's also a bit naive, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. He's sheltered, hasn't really seen the darker side of the world, and that makes him vulnerable to someone like Nachak, who's cunning and ruthless.
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking to see him fall prey to Nachak's schemes.
Hmm.
And their backgrounds, Garion raised on a farm, Leldoran in a castle, they have such different perspectives on the world.
It makes their dynamic really interesting, doesn't it? Garion's got that street smarts, that practicality, while Leldoran's more idealistic, chivalrous. They balance each other out in a way.
They do. And it's clear they care about each other despite their differences. They're both on this crazy journey together, learning, growing, and hopefully surviving.
Right. And they're going to need all the help they can get, because things are only going to get more complicated from here on out.
Oh, I know. We've got political intrigue, assassins, Grolims lurking in the shadows.
Yeah.
And did I mention Salmissra is still obsessed with Garion?
Right. She's not going to give up that easily. This is just the beginning.
Well, listeners, buckle up. Queen of Sorcery is a wild ride, full of twists and turns. We'll be back soon to delve even deeper into Garion's adventures.
It definitely is. I mean, they barely escape Nyissa alive, and what happens, they get ambushed by those creepy Algroths in the Orendish forests. Fog, mist, shadowy creatures. It's a recipe for disaster.
Oh, yeah. And it gets even worse, doesn't it? And Paul, she gets captured by the Grellams.
Yep, snatched right out from under their noses. Talk about a tense situation.
Oh, man. And Leldoran, he gets hurt pretty badly, right? I mean, those Algroths, they're nasty pieces of work.
Yeah, his injuries, they're serious. It really throws a wrench in their plans.
So what happens? I mean, they're down a sorceress. Leldoran's out of commission. They're in the middle of nowhere. What do?
Well, luckily for them, Sir Mandrallen shows up.
Mandrallen, the Membrate Knight, he's there.
Oh, yeah. Emerges from the mist like some kind of, chivalrous hero. Talk about perfect timing.
I mean, it's pretty convenient, isn't it? But I guess that's Eddings for you. He loves those dramatic entrances.
He does. And Mandrallen, he's an interesting character, isn't he? He's all about honor and chivalry, almost to a fault.
Right. He's got that whole code of conduct, that membrate thing, right? It's all very formal, very proper. Sometimes he's almost like a caricature.
I know what you mean. But he's also got this genuine compassion, this sense of duty that you can't help but admire.
Yeah, he's a good guy, deep down. But let's face it, he's not exactly the most adaptable, is he?
Not really. Especially when they get to Vaux-Membre, the Membrate capital. Talk about a culture shock.
Oh, yeah, Vaux-Membre. That place is intense. All those rules, all that etiquette, it's enough to make your head spin.
It's like stepping into another world. And it's a huge contrast to, Garion's upbringing on the farm.
I bet. And speaking of contrasts, Notchok shows up in Vaux-Membre, doesn't he?
Yep, the same Murgo who tricked Leldoran earlier. He's there, stirring up trouble.
And Mandrallen? I bet he wasn't too happy to see him.
You're telling me. It all leads to this big showdown, a trial by combat. Mandrallen, representing Membrate honor, versus Notchok, all deceit and manipulation.
It's like a clash of civilizations right there in the arena.
Exactly. And the way it ends, it's not Mandrallen who delivers the final blow, but Hedar.
Hedar, the Derald. He's there too.
Oh yeah, he's been with them this whole time, silent but deadly as always.
I always forget about him. He's so quiet, so unassuming. But then, bam, he takes action. It's pretty awesome, actually.
It is. Hedar, he's like a force of nature. You don't mess with him.
But even with Notchok gone, there's still this sense of unease, right? Like the fallout from that whole encounter, it's still rippling through the story.
Absolutely. Garion, he feels responsible for what happened, for the bloodshed, even though it wasn't really his fault.
Right. I mean, he didn't kill Notchok directly, but he feels this weight, this burden of leadership.
Well,
It's a lot for him to handle.
it is, but it's also a sign of his growth. He's starting to understand what it means to be a leader, to make tough choices, and to deal with the consequences.
Speaking of growth, what about Leldoran? How's he dealing with all of this?
Well, his injuries, they're pretty bad. He can't really travel, can't fight. And for someone like him, so active, so eager to prove himself, it's a blow.
I can imagine. It's got to be frustrating.
It is.
Yeah.
But he also has this moment of clarity, I think. He realizes he can still contribute, even if it's not on the front lines. He sends Garion on a mission to warn King Anheg about Notchok's treachery.
Right. Shows a lot of maturity, doesn't it? Putting the needs of others before his own.
It does. Leldoran, he's learning that heroism isn't always about swinging a sword. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard.
And meanwhile, the others, they continue on their journey. Right, they end up in Tolnidra, which is a whole different kind of crazy.
Oh, yeah, Tolnidra. Talk about a den of intrigue. It's all about money, power, and backstabbing.
Right, and Silk. He's in his element there, isn't he? All that spying, all that manipulation. He loves it.
He does. He thrives in that environment. And it's actually in Tolnidra that we get a glimpse of Salmissra's true intentions.
Really? How so?
They encounter this creaky guy, Yidis, who works for Countervor. And Yidis, he drops a bombshell. He tells Garion that Salmissra is obsessed with him, that she wants him for herself.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just about the orb. She actually has, like, a personal interest in Garion.
Apparently so. And it freaks Garion out, understandably. It adds a whole new layer of creepiness to their encounter with her in Nyissa.
It does. It's like, hey, she's not just a powerful sorceress. She's a stalker, too. Not a good combination.
No kidding. And it makes you wonder, what exactly does she have planned for him?
Right. It's pretty disturbing. But before we spiral down that rabbit hole, let's talk about something a little lighter. Remember the Erendish Fair?
Oh, yeah. The Great Erendish Fair. What a spectacle.
Talk about a change of pace. It's all colorful, lively, full of music and food, and those crazy Erendish acrobats.
It's a nice break from all the tension and danger, a chance for the characters to just breathe for a bit.
And it's where we run into Delvor again, right?
Yep. The flamboyant merchant extraordinaire, always popping up in the most unexpected places.
I love Delvor. He's so clever, so quick-witted, and he always seems to have a plan up his sleeve.
He's a survivor, that's for sure. And he proves to be a valuable ally, helping Garion and the others escape from those pesky Murgos who are still on their trail.
Right. Those Murgos just don't give up, do they?
Nope. But thankfully, Delvor's got their back. He helps them get to the Wood of the Dryads, which is a whole other kind of magical experience.
Ah, yes, the Dryads. They're not your typical forest nymphs, are they?
Not at all. They're fierce protectors of their domain, and they're not afraid to use their powers to defend it.
And it's there, in the Wood of the Dryads, that they meet Sinidra, right?
Yep. The runaway Tondren princess. Talk about an unexpected twist.
She's a handful, isn't she? So spoiled, so used to getting her own way.
Oh, for sure. But she's also got this vulnerability, this loneliness that you can't help but feel for.
Yeah, she's more than just a spoiled princess. There's a depth to her character that starts to emerge.
Definitely. And her relationship with Garion, well, let's just say it's complicated.
To say the least. It's like a mix of annoyance, attraction, and maybe a little bit of fear.
You got it. They're both strong-willed, independent, and used to being in charge, so sparks are bound to fly.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. But for now, they've got bigger problems to worry about.
Right. Like escaping from Nyssa, dealing with Salmissra's obsession, figuring out what the prophecy really means. There's never a dull moment in the Belgariad, that's for sure.
And that's what makes it so much fun to read.
Hmm.
We're on the edge of our seats, wondering what's going to happen next.
Exactly. So what are your thoughts so far? What stood out to you in Queen of Sorcery?
That's a good question. I think, for me, it's the way Garion is growing. He's not the same naive farm boy we met in Pawn of Prophecy. He's facing some really tough challenges, making difficult decisions, and he's starting to understand what it means to be a leader.
I agree. And it's not just Garion. All the characters are evolving, their relationships are changing, and the stakes are getting higher with every chapter.
It's definitely keeping me hooked.
So we left off with that crazy escape from Salmissra's palace, right?
Oh, yeah. Talk about a close call. They were practically swimming in snakes. I mean, how do you even recover from something like that?
Well, you don't really have much time to think about it, do you? They're still in Nyissa, remember? Surrounded by danger at every turn.
Right. Like those mud creatures, the clods. I still get chills just thinking about them. They're like something out of a nightmare.
And don't forget about those leeches. Nyssa is definitely not a place you want to get stuck in. It's a testament to Garion's growing powers and Aunt Pol's quick thinking that they managed to get out of there in one piece.
They had some help, though, didn't they? The Dryads, they played a part in that escape, right? It's almost like the forest itself was protecting them.
It is. It shows how interconnected everything is in this world, how even the forces of nature are involved in this struggle against Torak. But even with the Dryads' help, it's a harrowing journey.
And they're not just dealing with physical threats, are they? There's that whole psychological aspect, too. The fear, the uncertainty, the weight of the prophecy.
Exactly. And on top of all that, Garion's still dealing with the trauma of what happened with Chamdar, accidentally killing him with his powers. It's a lot for a young guy to process.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, what would have happened if he'd stayed in Nyissa under Salmissra's influence? Would he have been able to resist her manipulation?
That's a scary thought, isn't it? She was clearly trying to corrupt him, to use him for her own purposes. Thankfully, he had Aunt Paul there to guide him.
Aunt Paul is like a rock, isn't she? Always there, always steady, even when things are falling apart around them.
She is. She's the voice of reason, the protector, the one who keeps Garion grounded. And she's not afraid to call him out when he needs it. Remember that scene after he incinerates Chamdar? That was tough love, but it was what he needed.
Yeah, she doesn't sugarcoat things, does she? But she's also incredibly loving and supportive. She sees the potential in Garion, the hero he could become.
And she's not the only one who sees that potential. Barak, too, plays a crucial role in Garion's development, even though he might not always show it.
Barak. He's so gruff, so reserved. It's hard to imagine him being a mentor.
I know, right? But he's got this quiet wisdom, this strength that comes from facing his own demons. He helps Garion understand what it means to be a warrior, to fight for what's right, even when it's hard.
And Let's not forget about Header. He's always there, lurking in the shadows, ready to protect Garion. He's like a silent guardian angel, but with knives.
Right. You never know what he's thinking, but you know he's got Garion's back. And then, of course, there's Silk. He's not exactly a mentor, but he's definitely an influence on Garion.
Silk's more like the cool uncle, isn't he? The one who teaches you how to pick locks and gamble and get away with stuff.
Exactly. He's a bit of a rogue, but he's also incredibly clever and resourceful. And he's always there to offer a witty comment or a sly suggestion, even in the most dangerous situations.
He's a good guy to have on your side, that's for sure. And then there's Sinedra. Talk about a whirlwind.
Yo, she's something else, isn't she? Headstrong, spoiled, used to getting her own way, but she's also brave, compassionate, and ultimately good-hearted.
Their relationship is so interesting, isn't it? It's like a mix of irritation and fascination. They're constantly butting heads, but there's also this undeniable chemistry between them.
It's definitely a slow burn, but I think there's potential there for something special. They challenge each other, push each other to grow, and I think they bring out the best in each other, even if they don't always realize it.
It's one of those relationships you just can't help but root for. And it's just one of the many things that keeps me coming back to the Belgariad. These characters, they're so well developed, so relatable, even though they're in this fantastical world with prophecies and sorcery and gods.
That's what makes Eddings such a great writer, I think. He creates these characters that feel real, that you care about, even if they're fighting giant snakes or battling evil sorcerers.
Exactly. And Queen of Sorcery is a perfect example of that. It's got action, adventure, romance, humor. And it makes you think, too, about destiny, about choice, about the power we all have within us.
It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it, and it leaves you wanting more.
Well, listeners, that wraps up our deep dive into Queen of Sorcery. We hope you enjoyed the journey. And be sure to join us next time as we continue our exploration of the Belgariad with Magician's Gambit. Until then, keep those pages turning.